that's the Snake Valley. So I guess I can just maybe show you little pieces, and I can hand it over to Mark too when we get to sections that he's put together. But just starting with the overview, right off the bat, we try to immerse students in this real world kind of authentic context of the Snake Valley. So there's a background section here talking about the proposed groundwater extraction project. The idea was that Las Vegas region was going to put a pipeline up into northern Utah and Nevada along the boundary there and extract groundwater, which may have implications for the local stakeholders and for the kind of biology and unique ecology of the area, the water resources in general. So we provide a background with a map that shows where the students are going to be performing these well test analyses. So we've pulled data from the USGS for pump test and for slug test, so they can see right off the bat where they are. It kind of puts them into the region. And then kind of a figure here, just showing what the region looks like. I think I've already mentioned this, the targeted audience, the implementation. Both of us talked about how it'd be really nice to have this module go before something they might do out in the field. Both of us will have students go out and perform these sorts of tests in the field. And we talked about the struggle between trying to teach them what they're doing and them actually doing it at the same time. So they could do this and have an understanding of what sort of data that they're collecting before they actually start collecting that data. So that's at least my planned implementation for it. And I think it could also be used in a fully online course or a course that doesn't have a lab section.
So sorry, can I just jump in here real quick?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
The other thing about using this as a preview to fieldwork is that, and you'll see this kind of in the learning activities, is that these learning activities focus on real world field data collected by experts. And those field data don't match what you expect them to. So this often comes as a shock to students when they come out into the field the first time. And so this, prepares them for the fact that, hey, field data are messy and ugly, and you've got a lot of work to do to really make heads or tails of them. And this is not just something that you did wrong. This is part of the field that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. As part of the immersion is that this is something that the USGS has done. They've collected this data. They've actually analyzed this data. So students right off the bat see this has a real world implication. There are professionals that are using this sort of data that are doing this. And at the same time, you see that even the experts, the pros, are going to produce data sets sometimes that require a little bit of thinking to be able to constrain these hydraulic parameters from. So the module, that's the introduction. Let me go back to, okay, here we go. We divided it into 3 sections. This 4th section is still listed in our index, but we've decided to axe that. It still shows up though. We might need to resolve that. The first section is really kind of an introduction to let students get familiar with the HydroLearn platform. So there's not any higher cognitive level learning activities. It gives students an overview of aquifers and some of the definitions, some of the terminology. So we anticipate that most students will see this as a review. But if there are students that are coming from, hopefully there are students coming from outside Mark and I's classes, they can address any pre-existing knowledge gaps that they might need to see. So it's a very quick section. Again, kind of giving them the basics, got some figures and videos, and then a quick check your understanding at the end, multiple choice. And then we kind of go into the heart. We have basically these 2 parallel sections, section 2 and section 3, where they'll actually be doing the well tests, the analyses, one for a pump test and then one for a slug test, where they're working with that real USGS data set. And these are very parallel. They're basically walking through the same steps, just with the different types of analyses. So that this is where we focus on our higher cognitive level learning objectives. So I guess maybe Mark, if you want to take over the pump test.
Sure.
I don't know if you want me to navigate here or if you want to share your screen.
Yeah, why don't you just stick with your screen and save a few seconds. Okay. So if you just hop right into the pump test summary, we can take a look at kind of the way this is laid out. So our summary just gives you a really broad overview of what a pump test is. And let's just go to next here. And it lays out the particular learning objectives. And then you've got kind of just a very general description of what a pump test is and what you actually do. The way a pump test works is you pump water out of an aquifer, and you look at the drawdown in these observation wells. So to the right of the pumping well, the blue line is the drawdown curve, and so that is the depression of the water table caused by pumping this. And then from observing what the water level is in those observation wells, you can infer then some of the aquifer properties, so how well it moves water. Let's go on to the next one here. And so here we've got this set up so that there's these GIFs that just kind of start playing, and so you can actually see over time the development of the drawdown curve. And so this is like an illustration of this is what really happens as you're pumping this well. So once we kind of get through the general, this is what a pump test is, we get into the section on how you actually analyze it. And so these are where you start seeing actual data. This is the drawdown. So the drawdown is just how far the water level has fallen since you started that pump test. That plot above is in linear scale, and then you generally analyze it using a log scale. And this check your understanding it's using actual data, but it's largely a question of can you read a logarithmic scale? And some of these check your understandings are really going to be focused on that, because pretty much everything we do in this module depends on reading information off of logarithmic scales. So once we get through the general pump test information, we get into the assumptions. And so all of these methods run on a common set of assumptions, and then some additional assumptions are made. Here we get into a couple of different analysis methods. And so I don't think you need to necessarily go through the entire thing, but we've got a steady state analysis. So this is when nothing's changing in time. Can you go ahead to the TICE?
Yeah.
And let's scroll down, because the TICE has a graphical solution. And this is a solution that was conceived in the 1940s, and it actually relies on taking pieces of paper and sliding them, overlapping them and sliding them and matching up a curve. So if you go down here, we've got another GIF that kind of plays that process out. And when we get to the point of asking them to do this, there is a PowerPoint workbook that has the appropriate plots that they can actually shift around themselves to do this. The last section in the TICE section, and so what they're going to do there is just shift those data so that they fall onto the line, and then based on the match point, that red dot there, you can then calculate the hydraulic parameters. But Alex, if you slide down a little bit more, you've got, nope, further down. Why are we learning this? And this is a question that comes up from students all the time. Don't you do this with computers now? Why are you making me print stuff and slide papers around? And this was actually addressed by the editor of Groundwater Journal a few years ago. And it's really, there's a link to the article in here, and it's a great editorial about what you get and what kind of modeling intuition and insight you develop from doing these kind of hand calculations. And so you wanted to get that out early, as soon as you get that first calculation. So let's just go to the next. The next two are just different ways of analyzing similar data. So I don't think we need to necessarily go through these in detail. The check your understandings rely on pulling the relevant information off of the plots that we're showing, so that you can make sure that you're really reading those plots right and you're getting the right numbers off of them. And let's go to that learning activity. Oh, yeah, so we've got a discussion of error and uncertainty, and we'll do that. So in this learning activity, this is getting back to some of the real world data. And so at the bottom of that screen, those two red dots, the Southern Spring MX wells, are what we're analyzing here. And these are the source wells for, or part of the source area for Big Springs, which is indicated by those two green dots, BSMW and BSSW. So there's a reason for actually testing those wells. And then we get into some of the real world data, and we give them a really messy data set to analyze. And that learning objectives and particularly the procedure, the summary questions kind of walk them through not just analyzing these missing data, but figuring out how to handle the fact that the data are messy and how you address that. And I think I've probably taken more time than I need for this one, so we can turn it over to Alex for the rest of the.
Well, I mean, it's nice because both of these sections, the pump test and the slug test, follow really similar format. So I can probably just show the overview. I go through a summary, talk about the basics of slug tests, the procedure. I have a field video that I put together there. And then let me just show you the analyses that we have. There are 3 different types of analyses, and I step students through each one of those. And then the actual learning activity at the end is where they get to apply those 3 different types of analyses using real data from the USGS from the same area. So kind of building that cohesion with the pump test. And so there's a backstory here talking about this potential hydraulic connectivity between surface water recharge and deep groundwater that would be pumped. And so you're looking to see whether you have a confining layer or if there's some sort of connectivity provided by fractures in a limestone unit. So give them a background, a picture of the well and the setup and everything, and then essentially ask them the same thing that's asked in the pump test learning activity. Analyze the data, present the uncertainties with those data. They will have to choose which method produces the best results in their opinion, and they have to justify that decision. So at the end of this, they'll put together a report, and I used as an example report. As I mentioned, the USGS has done this already, so I put a link to their report, which is kind of nice because they can see what a professional put together. And you may think, well, the students can just go here and copy the data. Well, as Mark has indicated, this isn't the cleanest data set in the world. So, and we're also asking students to do additional analyses that weren't done by the USGS that maybe are more appropriate because they're doing them by hand. They get to see how the fit works. They get to see the assumptions and the uncertainty. And so they may come out of this with the potential to discuss, what's the right way to approach these data sets that maybe don't provide the best fit in the world. And at the same time, they get to see what a finished product should look like. So I think that's just about it in a nutshell. So I guess we have time for questions. Hopefully we didn't go too long.
Yeah, we have 16 minutes for questions. So,
oh, 16 minutes.
I'm sorry, 6 minutes. 6 minutes for questions. That's what happens when you're math faculty. So let's go ahead and open it up. You can either put your questions in the chat or unmute yourselves and jump in and ask Alex and Mark any of your questions.
How much time would a student need to finish this module? Great work, by the way. I look forward to reading it, more details, but on average, how much a student will need time to finish the module?
I think we both thought it would probably take 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. The first section, again, it's just an intro to HydroLearn and kind of stepping them through a review. I don't think that would take more than a day or 2 at most. But then I think I would recommend the pump test be 1 week of class essentially, or 1 week of work, and then the slug test be 1 week of work as well.
when I go over this in class, I spend a lot of time actually deriving the governing equations because I teach it in the geological engineering class, and so that is really kind of that takes longer than 2 weeks for all this. But from the standpoint of okay, now we've done all this, let's practice it. I think that's a pretty good week for the pump test and a week for the slug test, and that's a good time frame.
Yeah,
I was asking about how many hours the student will spend on it, and if you already captured that in the introduction section, then that's okay.
Sometimes it's hard to tell ahead of time when you create them how long they'll take for students. So you might ask some of your students if they're willing to kind of keep a log of the hours they spend on this to give a better time frame. I know I always say, oh, that'll just take a couple of hours, and it ends up taking twice or 3 times as long as I thought it would.
And as soon as they tell me who my TA is going to be for the fall, they're going to go through it.
Yeah, and that can actually give you right away some feedback on where students might have problems, if you have like any missing information or data that's not working or a link. So it's always a great exercise to ask one of the students to try it out.
I've got a question
there. Do the students end up having to make any sort of recommendation relative to the policy questions about whether that aquifer can get pumped to supply water for Las Vegas? So, which is the sort of societal motivator for this?
So from a larger perspective, we can kind of convey some of those policy questions just based on the fact that the Southern Nevada Water Authority walked away from this project a couple of months ago. So that this project is now more or less dead. But we both, I don't know, I'm not going to speak for Alex. I teach at a public university in a relatively conservative state in which Las Vegas has a whole lot of political power. And so asking students to do that is not always the best thing for classroom discussions, not just for kind of the students, but it doesn't always go super smoothly.
Yeah, I would say, I wouldn't have plans myself to take it to that level unless we had a modified semester where we weren't able to get out in the field. Because I see this kind of as a springboard to get students familiar with the analyses before they go and collect their own data. But if they didn't have that opportunity to get out in the field, let's say we were fully online, then I think that would be great to have maybe take it a step further and have a discussion, in-class discussion about the practicality of this particular project. But I think that would take it much further beyond what we have the instructional content for at this stage. But it's a good idea for sure.
That's definitely true. To really get into any of the policy implications, you need to get into the regional groundwater flow model that was informed by these data. And so just having a couple of values of transmissivity or hydraulic conductivity isn't going to get you very far in that discussion.
And Willie posted a question in the chat box. Not sure if y'all saw it.
Oh yeah, I think that might be directed at me. So it is an intro to kind of aquifer characterization, hydrogeology, but at the same time, it kind of steps students through HydroLearn and how to navigate. So if they come across any issues or any problems, then we'll be able to address that at the forefront.
Yeah, it's kind of both.
Can be readily. So I see a question there, comments on whether this can be readily independently used by other instructors. I can't speak for other instructors, but I would imagine so. The other groundwater folks that we that have their module coming out, we both discussed that these are things that we cover. These are things that are kind of standard in the textbook, the reference that a lot of us use, and we've just kind of brought new light to it. So I would imagine that it's ready to go for other instructors.
Yeah, I've talked to a few other instructors about what we're doing, and they're interested in seeing it. And hopefully they'll look at adopting it too.